Alright, so first and foremost, I'm going to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahweh Shai, and double honors to the elder bishops and apostles of Great Millstone at time of this truth. Another week in, week out, doing the work of Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahweh Shai, as Yahweh Shai is commanding, out here on the highways and byways. And, give me a second. First thing I wanted to go into was the whole thing. You know, it's been going on in the news more and more and more, going into, you know, the U.S. war with Iran. And this is something that, you know, a lot of people are not really paying attention to. And I'm realizing that, you know, it's as Yahweh Shai said, you know, it's going to be as in the days of Noah. They're going to be eating, marrying, giving into marriage. Okay, and they knew not until the flood came. But this time, they're not going to know until the fire comes, you know, which is going to be those thermonuclear missiles. So we start in 2 Peter chapter 3, and I don't got an extra phone on me today, and I don't have the Apocrypha, so I'm going to just be able to I'm going to go straight off the scriptures, off the dome, you know, with what I got. But 2 Peter chapter 3 and I'll start at verse 9. It says, I'll start at verse 10. It says, "But the day of Yahweh will come as a thief in the night, in the which the heavens shall pass away with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. The earth also, the works that are in, shall be burned up." Right, and that day is going into the day of Jacob's trouble. It's referred to a time like never before seen. It's referred to, you know, talking about the nuclear destruction. Reading the scriptures, it talks about in that day, right, the day of the Lord, right? So Yahweh, the Heavenly Father, destroyed the earth with water last time, but this time is going to be with fire, which is going to be once again with those intercontinental ballistic missiles, which this is what eventually it will all lead to, right? This whole thing with Iran and all this conflict eventually will lead to a digital system which is going to involve the mark of the beast, which is the RFID chip. And in order to partake in the system, you're going to have to take that. If you take that, then you have no chance for salvation. Okay, you're slated for destruction. So it says, "But the day of Yahweh will come as a thief in the night, in the which the heavens shall pass away with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. The earth also and the works that are therein shall be burned up." Right, and the heavens passing with a great noise is going to happen, like I said, because of nuclear missiles. It's going to literally shake the earth. Okay, it says in Isaiah, the earth is going to shake. It's going to reel to and fro like a drunkard. Well, let's get that. So when you go to Isaiah chapter 24, Isaiah chapter 24 and verse 19, it says, "The earth is utterly broken down, the earth is clean dissolved, the earth is moved exceedingly. The earth shall reel to and fro like a drunkard, and shall be removed like a cottage, and the transgression thereof shall be heavy upon it, and it shall fall and not rise again." Right, and that's what's going to cause this, that great noise. Right, as it says, the elements are going to melt with fervent heat. Okay, it's talking about the thermonuclear destruction. It says, "And it shall come to pass in that day that Yahweh shall punish the host of the high ones that are on high, and the kings of the earth upon the earth. And they shall be gathered together as prisoners are gathered in the pit, and shall be shut up in the prison, and after many days shall they be visited." Right, which goes into how, you know, when this all goes down, if you go to Revelation 6, it talks about how the mighty ones, the noble ones, are going to go into the dens of the rocks and into the mountains, going into those bunkers to hide, you know, from the nuclear destruction. But once it goes down, you know, Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai is going to give his elect, you know, those new bodies, that spiritual power to grab them from wherever they're at and put them in chains. Okay, because part of the kingdom of heaven, which is the Israelites ruling on the earth, is that these other nations will be under us. Okay, they will be our slaves for 1,000 years, is what it says. After the 1,000 years, okay, the other nations, except the Edomites, are going to be able to, do their own thing, but the Edomites will be exterminated, according to Obadiah, the 1st chapter, and other books that talk about Edom's destruction, which these scholars know that, I think it says that in the Zondervan Bible Dictionary. It says that the only nation that is not promised any mercy is the Edomites. So it says, and they shall be gathered together as prisoners are gathered in the pit, and shall be shut up in the prison, and after many days shall they be visited. Then the moon shall be confounded and the sun ashamed, when Yahweh of hosts shall reign in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem, and before his angels gloriously. Right, and that's talking about the end game, okay, which is Israel on top, the Israelites. Okay, which a lot of people are realizing that those people over there in the Holy Land are not the true people. Okay, that they're imposters. And hey, I could go the whole hour and 15, of my camp going into how, they're not the right people. But the easiest way to explain that, or to break it down prophetically, is the fact that it says that when the Israelites go back to the Holy Land, that there will be complete peace on the earth. That's one thing, and there is no peace over there, right? Second is it says that the Heavenly Father is going to be the one that takes them over there, not a 1948 Balfour Declaration, right? They put themselves in that land. So that's the second point. They don't line up with the prophecy. Third, it says in Luke that Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Right? Yahushua said that. And that started in 70 AD, when the temple got sacked. So ever since then, the Gentiles have been completely running over that city, which that's also written in Ezekiel 35, which I'm actually do a little detour to go into that. Ezekiel 35. It's been a minute since I touched on this. Ezekiel 35, might as well start on verse 1. And it's actually 36, but the Spirit led me to 35. It says, moreover, the word of Yahweh came unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face against Mount Seir, and prophesy against it. And that's what, I'm here doing today, what the brothers are doing, every single day, by making the videos, by going to the highways and byways, is, first we're putting this word out there for the elect of the nation of Israel. The second is to also let these nations know, what's coming. We're letting these Edomites know that their kingdom is right around the corner. It says, Son of man, set thy face against Mount Seir, and prophesy against it, and say unto it, Thus saith Yahweh, Behold, O Mount Seir, I am against thee, and I will stretch out mine hand against thee, and I will make thee most desolate. Right? And that's something that, if you understand the scriptures, you'll know that everything that's happening is the Lord's will. Okay, everything that DJ Trump says is to all fulfill the prophecies that the Lord has ordained. Okay, the things that have been written. It says that in Proverbs chapter 21 and verse 1, that the king's heart is in the hand of Yahweh. Right, he turneth it whithersoever he will, as the rivers, roughly paraphrasing. Right, so the Lord is the ultimate, chess master. And even DJ Trump, I was listening to a video today. This guy was going into how, he's not a stupid person. He got educated by all those people at the top. He ran all types of businesses and, did all these things. And he was going into how, the way that he portrays himself as being ignorant is all just a ploy. And it's true. The reason it's true is because he's getting orders from those top banking families, Rothschilds, Rockefellers, Vanderbilts, DuPonts, in order to fulfill those agendas. Right? He's just a pawn, and he's doing exactly what they're telling him to do. So this is the ultimate, chess game. And the only way you win is by having faith in Yahweh B'Hashem Yahushai. And that's the only way you win. So it says, I will lay thy cities waste, and thou shalt be desolate, and thou shalt know that I am Yahweh, because thou hast had a perpetual hatred, and hast shed the blood of the children of Israel by the force of the sword in the time of their calamity, in the time that their iniquity had an end. right? And that goes into how, you know, they destroyed us as a nation here in America, you know, starting from like 1612. I believe that's when the first Negro slave ship hit the shores of America. And then you go into the 350-year prophecy, which goes into how we're going to be here, you know, in a downtrodden down state for 350 years. And then, you know, the truth was going to come, which that's exactly what happened. You know, around 1970, you know, the truth sprung out of Harlem, New York. And ever since then, you know, you can see how, you know, what the Lord has done, you know, given the increase, which, you know, you read about that in Acts, about how, you know, it says that the Pharisees got all types of, you know, lewd, baser men to come against the disciples, because it says that these men have turned the world upside down. And that's the same thing that's happening today, right? You got all types of people on these TikTok and YouTube talking about the Hebrew Israelites and making, you know, trying to make debunk videos when that's not going to do nothing, okay? Because ultimately these prophecies are going to come out, and you can do nothing against the truth, but only for the truth. So it says, therefore, as I live, saith Yahweh, I will prepare thee unto blood, and blood shall pursue thee. Since thou hast not hated blood, even blood shall pursue thee. Right, and this lines up with Revelation 13:10, when it says that here is the patience of the saints. He that killeth with the sword must be killed by the sword. He that leadeth to captivity must be led into captivity. And as it says, that's the faith and patience of the saints. That's what the elect are going to be waiting for, is for a justice to ultimately be established. Right? Everything that they did unto us is going to happen unto them. Right? And I always quote it. You know, Thomas Jefferson said, I tremble knowing that the Lord is a just power, because he understood that what his people did was not right, and that if the Lord is truly a just power, that everything they did is going to come upon their own heads. And that's exactly what's going to happen, and it's going to happen twofold. That's the thing. So it says, thus will I make Mount Seir most desolate, and cut off from it him that passeth out, and him that returneth. When it's dealing with Mount Seir, it's really talking about America, because Mount Seir is going into the main habitation of the Edomites. And the main habitation of the Edomites is here in America, aka Babylon the Great. So it says, I will make thee perpetual desolations, and thy cities shall not return, and ye shall know that I am Yahweh. Right? So this thing is certainly going to happen. That's why it says, Jeremiah chapter 50. Let's get that. Ezekiel, Jeremiah chapter 50. Jeremiah chapter 51 is what I want. Jeremiah 51 and verse 6 says, flee out of the midst of Babylon, and deliver every man his soul. Be not cut off in her iniquity, for this is the time of Yahweh's vengeance. He will render unto her a recompense. Right? And this is not talking about physically fleeing, right? It's going into departing from this place spiritually. Right? It says that in Micah chapter 2 and verse 10. It says, arise ye and depart, for this is not your rest. Right? It is polluted, it shall destroy you. Going into how, you know, we're still in captivity as a nation. Okay? Trusting in this kingdom is going to lead to you being wicked and you being destroyed. So that's why it says in Hebrews that for we have no continuing city here, but we seek a city to come. Roughly paraphrasing once again. So it says, Babylon hath been a golden cup in Yahweh's hand, that made all the earth drunken. The nations have drunken over wine, therefore the nations are mad. Right? And that's what we see, you know, that cup is, or it says, right, the nations have drunken of the wine. The wine is symbolic for philosophy. Right? The philosophy of America is feminism, westernization, being Americanized. You know, that's what it's called nowadays, which pretty much is just wickedness. And that's why it says that, you know, Babylon was a den of devils and every foul creature, because pretty much anything flies here. So it says, the nations have drunken over wine, right? The nations have been influenced to be like this. Therefore, the nations are mad, right? Because they're realizing that this type of lifestyle is not conducive to being productive. You know, it's not going to lead to a better society. It says, Babylon is suddenly fallen and destroyed. How for her? Take balm for her pain, if so she may be healed. Right? So the ultimate game plan is that this will fall. Right? It says, take balm for her pain if she may be healed. But there is no healing this kingdom. Right? That's why no matter what laws, legislations, or policies that anyone passes, it's all going to lead down the same road. No matter what president, it's all going to lead down the same road, to the digital system and to the nuclear destruction of Babylon. So it says, verse 11, make bright the arrows, gather the shields. Yahweh hath raised up the spirit of the kings of the Medes, for his device is against Babylon to destroy it, because it is the vengeance of Yahweh, the vengeance of his temple. Right, which those arrows is going into those nuclear missiles. Okay, and the Medes is going into the Russians. Okay, Russia is going to be a key player in the Third World War. Okay, and the world wars have been prophesied. Right, you go into Revelation, it talks about, you know, whoa, whoa, whoa. You know, the three woes, the three world wars. And it says, the second woe is past, behold, the third woe cometh quickly. Right, and this is what we're approaching. We're seeing the beginning of the end of Esau's kingdom. Okay, and as it says in 2 Ezra 6 and 9, for Esau is the end of the world, and Jacob is the beginning of it that followeth. So, if you're in the proper mindset, you should be looking, as it says 2 Peter 3 and verse 10, right? Looking for and hastening unto the coming of the day of God, wherein the heavens shall be on fire, you know, dissolved. So we're supposed to be looking for and hastening that, right? Wanting this to come. Which that goes completely contrary to the mindset of the people here, right? The mindset of the people here is that this is never going to fall, that they want to be here forever, right? Living the American dream. But like I said, Yahweh B'Hashem Yahweh Shai is not with that, okay? So it says, let's keep going down 51, and then we'll go to 50 and get the points. Verse 20 says, thou art my battle axe and weapons of war, for with thee will I break in pieces the nations that will destroy kingdoms. Right? And that's what Yahweh Shai talked about when you go into Revelation 2 and 10. It says, let me actually pull that, which he was quoting a psalm. Revelation 2 and 25 is what I was going into. It says, but that which ye have already hold fast till I come. Right? And that's going into the truth, which I'm realizing more and more, you know, how this world can really pull you, okay? This world can really distract you from what's important, which is the words of the Heavenly Father, 441, 144, call halal Yahweh B'Hashem Yahweh Shai. Right? But the elect are not going to be disenchanted. Right? The elect are going to always remember that this comes first and foremost. And that's why, you know, Yahweh Shai said that if any man, you know, love his father, mother, sister, children more than me, you know, he's not fit for the kingdom of heaven. Roughly paraphrasing, right? Going, the same thing was echoed when he says, if any man, you know, hating on his father and mother, and, you know, he can't follow me. And the concept was that if you put those things before the Lord, you're not going to make it. Because putting anything before the Lord means that now there's a chance you're going to fail. Now, something can pop up, something can be taken from you, and it is going to make you fall out. Right? For example, if you're all into money, and money is your thing, money is your God, if you become broke, then you might stop believing. So that's why it talks about, you know, the straight gate. It talks about how, you know, don't think it's strange, concerning the fiery trial which shall try you, as though something strange happened unto you, right? It's supposed to be that way where, it's not easy. But as I was reading Revelation 2 and verse 26, it says, and he that overcometh and keepeth my works unto the end, to him will I give power over the nations, right? And that's not equality, okay, which is something that has been falsely taught in all these churches, which is that the Lord loves everybody. I was watching a conference by Trump today, and he was talking about, it was his vice person, I think it was Pete Hegseth or something along those lines, and he was talking about how, the Lord is good every single day, which that's what everyone believes, and is not true, because it says in Deuteronomy, I am the Lord, I do good and do evil. It says in Amos, the 3rd chapter, that, if there be evil in the city, had the Lord not done it? So it says that the issues of death are from the Lord. So the Lord doesn't just do good, right? He also does the left-hand side. He's in control of everything. Another example is Job. When you go into Job, the 1st chapter, it talks about how, there is a council in the heavens, and all the angels, went. And it says that Satan appeared also, because Satan is an angel of the Most High, right? Angel means messenger. Satan was created for his own purpose, which was to do the left-hand bidding. So it was going into how it says, have you considered my servant Job? And Satan said, of course, but you set a protection around him that, I can't touch him. You've protected everything he has. But it says, but put forth thine hand now, and watch he'll curse thee to thy face. And the reason I bring that out is because Satan couldn't do nothing without the authorization of the Lord, showing you that even the Lord controls Satan. So the point is that he is in control of everything, right? And there is no such thing as equality when it comes to the nations in the eyes of the Most High. You can read about that in 2nd Ezra 6. Talks about how all these nations to the Most High, are as a drop in a bucket, right? They're as spittle, insignificant. And Ezra says, why have these heathen, which have been reputed as nothing, have begun to be lords over us? How long shall this endure? And we're still in that condition to this day, with these other nations on the top and us at the bottom. And it goes into, the curses that the Most High put upon us as a nation for disobedience, right? Written about in Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter. So it says, and he that overcometh and keepeth my works unto the end, to him will I give power over the nations, and he shall rule them with a rod of iron. As the vessels of a potter shall they be broken to shivers, even as I received of my Father. Right? So going back to Jeremiah 50, when it talks about how Jeremiah 51 and verse 20 says, thou art my battle axe and weapons of war, for with thee will I break into pieces the nations, and with thee will I destroy kingdoms. And that's going into in the kingdom. Okay? We are going to be the ones that are bringing forth that judgment. Another scripture that talks about it is Obadiah, the 1st chapter, and verse 17. It says, but upon Mount Zion shall be deliverance, and there shall be holiness, and the house of Jacob shall possess their possessions. Right? Because everything that these nations have will be in our jurisdiction. Right? Another scripture that talks about it, which I'll go after this, is Isaiah 14. It says, and the house of Jacob shall be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame, and the house of Esau for stubble. For they shall kindle in them and devour them, and there shall not be any remaining of the house of Esau, for Yahweh hath spoken it. Right? So the Israelites are going to be the ones that bring that judgment upon you Edomites in the kingdom. Okay? And it's really going to be from the Heavenly Father Yahweh. He's going to use us to bring forth his judgment. And no Edomite is going to be left. Right? Which that is complete, extermination. And it says for Yahweh hath spoken it. Right? This is what the Lord wants. Verse 21 says, the Savior shall come upon Mount Zion to judge the mount of Esau, and the kingdom shall be Yahweh's, right? And that's the end game, okay? These are all future prophecies about what eventually will take place. So let's go back to Jeremiah 51 and hit the points. Jeremiah 51 and verse 28, it says, prepare against her the nations with the kings of the Medes, the captains thereof, and all the rulers thereof, and all the land of his dominion. And the land shall tremble and sorrow, for every purpose of Yahweh shall be performed against Babylon, to make the land of Babylon a desolation without an inhabitant. Right, so this place is going to be completely wiped off the map. It's going to become a desert. That's how, heavy those bombs are going to hit. It says in 1 hour, Babylon will be completely wiped out. So it says, the mighty men of Babylon have forborne to fight. They have remained in their holds. Their might hath failed. They became as a woman. They have burned her dwelling places. Her bars are broken. Right, so these Babylonian men, American men, when they get those draft letters, when DJ Trump says the American army over there to fight, they're not going to go fight. Majority of them are not going to go fight because they realize that this kingdom is not benefiting them. They realize that all wars are bankers' wars, and that this is just another plot. People have lost that American patriotic spirit, which, if you go to Joel chapter 2, it talks about how, the northern army is going to go over there to the east to fight. Joel 2 and 20. Joel 2 and 20 says, but I will remove far off from you the northern army, and will drive him into a land barren and desolate, with his face toward the east sea, and his hinder part toward the utmost sea, and his stink shall come up, and his ill savor shall come up, because he had done great things. Right, so this northern army is going to be sent over there to the east to fight. World War III. Okay, a draft will happen. Okay, and it's going to get to a point where, I believe that they're going to start drafting whoever they can. They're going to up those limits to 50, 60, years old, bringing back old veterans to go put them on the front lines. Which, I was talking with this one Cuban, which he was talking about how he was in the Iraq War, and he was talking about how, which what he said made me realize that, everyone has their lot. Everyone came here to do a specific thing. Because I was telling him, what do you think about this whole Iran, war? And he said, I can't wait till they call me. He said in Spanish, I can't wait till they call me to go fight. And I was like, what? He said, yeah, I can't wait to go. The adrenaline, you get adrenaline from everywhere. He's like, if they were to tell me in 1 month I leave my family, I leave my wife, my children, my daughter, and I go over there to fight. And I was listening to that, I'm like, wow, like, you can tell that there was nothing that was going to change him from that mindset. The only thing that can really get you out of that mindset is Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, right? But he was fully dead on doing that. And in the spirit, I just realized that, that's his lot. His lot is going to be to go over there and to ultimately be judged. Because, that's what the scriptures talk about, how there is people that have to go over there. So, it's crazy because as I was reading, that will happen. They are going to send people over there. One more time, but I will remove far off from you the northern army, North American army, and will drive him into a land barren and desolate, which is going into those deserts of Saudi Arabia. It says, with his face toward the east sea, and his hinder part toward the utmost sea, which the east sea goes into the Persian Gulf, and his hinder part toward the utmost sea goes into the Red Sea, if I remember correctly. Right? It's right in that Saudi Arabia region. It says, and his stink shall come up, and his ill savor shall come up, because he had done great things. Right? So it will happen. And whoever goes to fight in this third world war isn't going to survive. Okay, everyone that goes will be ultimately destroyed. Because what they're not expecting is for Yahweh to come back in the midst of all that. Which that's written about in 2nd Esdras chapter 13. It talks about how, these nations are going to be fighting in between, one another, and that once they see Yahushua come back, because he's going to come back in the midst of that, that's talked about in Revelation 11. I'll go through that. But it says that once they see him, they're all going to get together, and it says an innumerable multitude was gathered to come again against him, but he was the only one standing on the top of the mountain. Right? So they're all going to get destroyed coming against the Messiah. So going over there to the east is ultimately a death sentence, no matter who you are. But Revelation chapter 11 and verse 12, it says, I'll start at verse 11. It says, and after 3 days and a half, the spirit of life from Yahweh entered into them, and they stood upon their feet, and great fear fell upon them which saw them. Right, which that goes into the awakening, okay, of the Israelites, okay, and that's going into the 350-year period, the 3 days and a half. There's a point where us as a nation were completely destroyed, without knowing our identity. But it talks about in Baruch, the 2nd chapter, around verse 28 to like 5 verses down, it talks about how in the land of their captivities they shall remember themselves. And that's why what we're seeing with our people waking up is having such a massive effect, on all these doctrines, on the so-called Christians, so-called Catholics, so-called Muslims. As it says, they turn the world upside down because the truth is coming out. So in the land of their captivities, they shall remember themselves. And this ties into directly in Ezekiel, the 37th chapter. Which I'm going to go to there just to hit the point. Ezekiel 37, which goes into the valley of the dry bones, which is dealing with those dry bones. It was going into the spiritually dead Israelites, which would be those that were scattered, not knowing who they are, following the ways of the other nations, right? Which that goes back to the curse, in Deuteronomy 28, verse 64, that we're going to be scattered throughout all 4 corners of the earth, made to worship gods made out of wood and stone, okay? New gods, right? There was a time where, the God of the Muslims, Allah or Muhammad, that didn't exist. That's something new. But you got Jakes, out there wearing a kufi, walking around the black cube, following gods made out of wood and stone. But, same thing with nowadays with, Jesus Christ, which even though, is based on some of the Bible, it's still a false God. Because the doctrine that's tied with JC is salvation for everybody, the Holy Trinity, that Mary was a virgin and didn't have sex with Joseph, that all nations can be saved, that there's a place called hell where you burn forever, in his image of white hair, blue eyes. It comes with a whole different doctrine, and that's a false God. So even the Bible has been, they've made a false God out of the Bible. But the truth is coming out now, and you can see how these so-called Christians are cut, because the way the brothers we're bringing out the word is something that they can't come against. We're bringing out scriptures and prophecies that they've never heard of. You guys, so-called Christians out here talking about bring it out, going out to the streets, and trying to prophesy or speak the word, when they weren't doing that before the elder bishops and apostles of Great Millstone. But it says, Ezekiel 37 in verse 10, it says, so I prophesied as he commanded me, and the breath came into them, and they lived and stood upon their feet, an exceeding great army. Right, and that ties exactly into Revelation 11:11, about after 3 days and a half, the spirit of life from God entered into them, right? As it says, the breath came into them, and they lived, going into how we know who we are now. We're no longer, calling ourselves by these titles, the Proverbs and the bywords, the Latino and Negro and Native American and Spick and Wetback and none of that. We're Israelites, okay? So that's us standing upon our feet, knowing who we are. And it says that in Wisdom of Solomon chapter 5 verse 1, or Wisdom of Solomon chapter 5, it says that they stood upon their feet, and great fear fell upon them which saw them, going into the same thing. So it says, and they stood upon their feet, and great fear fell upon them which saw them, which goes into the elites, right? Those at the top, because they know the prophecies and who we are as a nation. Recently, maybe like 3-4 days ago, you had Nathaniel Rothschild, which is part of that family, come out talking about how, oh, the end is near, right? He tweeted that on his X, which was called Twitter. And the reason he tweeted that is because he knows the prophecies, right? It ties into Revelation 2 and verse 10, I believe, or Revelation 3. It talks about how the devil shall come down with a great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time, right? So they're tapped into the left-hand side, okay? They know what's written, but it says that the pride that they have had deceived thee, right? The pride of these Edomites has deceived them to think that they're gonna be able to change what's written, and that's why they're still gonna ultimately push forth with, their NWO 2030 agenda, and ultimately, the chip, the digital system, which, that whole digital system and why they're trying to do that goes back to, it says in Isaiah 14 that their mindset is, to be like the Most High, which is full control. And that technology, to those who take it, is going to give them that full control, right? If you don't agree with the policies of the government, if you don't take the latest V, if you don't, you can't say this or that, no freedom of speech. Essentially, if you don't comply with what's being said, they could just turn off your chip, right? Everything's going to be tied into the chip, the buying and selling, the being part of society, the working. It's all going to be tied to the chip. And that's why it's the ultimate test. Because, hey, let's see if you have faith enough to survive without knowing where you're going to get your water, your food, where you're going to sleep, what you're going to wear. Right? Let's see if you have enough faith to be off the grid. And that's why a lot of people are not going to be able to. A lot of people are going to fold when they get that alert, when they get that news flash. They're going to fold. Okay, it says that in 2 Ezra 16 that then shall they be known who are my chosen, and they shall be tried as the gold in the fire. So we're going to see who really believes when all these things start happening. And in that same chapter, a couple of verses down, it says, "Be ye not afraid, neither doubt, for Yahweh is your guide, and the guide of them who keep my precepts and commandments." Right? So Yahweh Bashim Yahushai is going to be the one that delivers us when all these things happen. That's why, your whole mindset shouldn't be on prepping and prepping and prepping, because all that is carnal. Okay? No amount of prepping is going to be able to get you through what's coming. Which it seems like the next thing is those famines. Right? The scriptures talk about famines, right? Which means a lack of bread. Doesn't mean no bread. It means a lack of bread. Hard to find. And that's going to be another thing that really accelerates these prophecies. When people can't eat, that's when the flesh is the most activated. Is when people can't eat. Right? When you have that, when the flesh has that pain. That's why fasting is one of the highest spiritual practices, because you're completely denying, your flesh of what it needs. So, when have you seen these average Babylonians fast? Almost never. And that's why, their first thing is going to be to do something carnal. But the elect will be sustained through no matter what happens. You can read about that in Isaiah 65. Go there. Isaiah 65. In verse 12. It says, "Therefore will I number you to the sword, ye shall all bow down to the slaughter, because when I called ye did not answer, when I spake ye did not hear, but did evil before mine eyes, and did choose that wherein I delighted not." Right? So you Israelites, you are going to be put down, because Yahweh Bashim Yahushai, as it says in Jeremiah, "I have sent out I have sent up rising early, my prophets." Rising early, daily, send you my people. Daily you got videos going out. Weekly you got brothers going out. Sometimes more than once a week, twice a week going out there prophesying. And you people still don't want to get right. Right? As it says in Ezekiel 33, last couple verses, it says that, thou art unto them as a very lovely song, for they hear thy words, but they will not do them. For their heart goeth after their covetousness. So our people hear, what's being said, but they want to do what they want to do, right? It says that in Peter that they don't want to submit themselves unto the righteousness of the Most High. They want to establish their own righteousness. So it says, therefore thus saith Yahweh, behold, my servant shall eat, but ye shall be hungry. Behold, my servant shall drink, but ye shall be thirsty. Behold, my servant shall rejoice, but ye shall be ashamed. Behold, my servant shall sing for joy of heart, but ye shall cry for sorrow of heart, and shall howl for vexation of spirit. Right? So when this goes down, those that had faith, that have been storing up their treasures in heaven, been doing the right thing, are going to reap, okay, are going to collect and be sustained, right? One way or another. The point isn't how it's going to happen, it's knowing that it's going to happen, right? That's the thing. That's a whole video right there. The point is not knowing how it's going to happen, it's knowing that it's going to happen. Some way, somehow, it's going to take place. And that's why, if you really are tapped into the Spirit, you shouldn't be worrying about what's taking place, right? Worrying, it says, be not afraid, neither doubt, right? You're not supposed to worry. You're supposed to understand that the Lord got you no matter what, right? No ifs, ands, or buts, just knowing, right? That's why it says, be still and know that I am Yahweh, right? Knowing is a heavy thing, because once you know, you no longer doubt. You know it's going to happen. So it says, verse 4 is also fire in Isaiah 66. It says, I also will choose their delusions, and I will bring the fears upon them. Because when I called, none did answer. When I spake, they did not hear. But they did evil before mine eyes, and chose that in which I delighted not. Right? So the Most High is going to terrorize you Israelites. Okay, you 2/3. Because you essentially ignored him when he gave you that mercy. So now you got to pay, for what you have done. We could go to Psalms, the 2nd chapter. It deals with that point. Psalms chapter 2. It's actually Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 1. I'll start at verse 20. It says, wisdom crieth without, she uttereth her voice in the streets. She crieth in the chief place of concourse, in the openings of the gates, in the city, she uttereth her words, saying, right, and that goes into, what we're doing today, what the prophets have done since the beginning, is it says that they go into the gates of the city where people cross the main places of concourse of walking. That's why it says the highways and byways, the downtowns, and they let their people know what's going to take place. But our people hate that. It says that they hate him that rebuketh at the gate. They hated the prophets. They misused the prophets because they really hate Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushua. But it says, how long, ye simple ones, will ye love simplicity, and the scorners delight in their scorning, and fools hate knowledge. Right, and that goes into, Hosea, I believe it's 2 and says, my people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. Right, you Israelites are destroyed because you want to be simple. Right, you want to, as they say, ignorance is bliss, no accountability. When in actuality, the opposite of ignorance is awareness. Right, you want to be as aware as possible to understand how to move, to not make mistakes. Make as least mistakes as possible, because mistakes come from a lack of awareness. But it says, turn you at my reproof. Behold, I will pour out my spirit unto you. I will make known my words unto you. And that's what's happening right now, is the Most High is letting his people know through his prophets, as it says, I believe it's Hebrews 1:1. It says, God, who at sundry times spoke through his servants the prophets, Right? Yahweh, the Heavenly Father, or Yahweh Bashim Yahweh Shai, is not just going to pop up in front of you. No, he's going to use his men to ultimately show his message. That's why Yahweh Shai said, right, if they hate you, know that they hated me first. Right? Because I testify that their works are evil. Right? You hate Yahweh Bashim Yahweh Shai. We're just the messengers. But it says, because I have called and ye refused, I have stretched out my hand, and no man regarded. Be upset and not all my counsel, and with none of my reproof. I also will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when your fear cometh. When your fear cometh as desolation, and your destruction cometh as a whirlwind, when distress and anguish cometh upon you, then shall they call upon me, but I will not answer. They shall seek me early, but they shall not find me. Right? So, Most High is going to mock, okay, you 2/3, you people, because when he gave you that opportunity, the chance, y'all just, disregarded it as nothing. So he's going to do the same thing, okay? And, it says in Psalms chapter 110, I believe, it says that thy people shall be willing in the day of thy power, right? You Israelites are going to want to get right once you see these prophecies take place. Once you see, the trip, once you see that war is actually going to take place, that's when you Israelites are going to want to get right, because you're going to realize that nothing carnally is going to be able to sustain you, right? It says that in Zephaniah chapter 1. Let me finish this verse and then go there. It says, then shall they call upon me, but I will not answer. They shall seek me early, but they shall not find me, right? Because you're not going to be able to find me out here doing this. Lord willing, I'm a part of that number. The brothers doing the work, making YouTube videos. There's going to be a time where it's illegal, okay? Where it's going to be considered seditious. And that's when ultimately the famine of the word is going to kick in. By the end of this ministry is going to be done. Which it talks about that in Amos. Let's get that, Amos 5, I believe. Amos chapter 'Give me a second. I think I was there, I just missed it. Amos chapter 8 and verse 11. It says, behold, the days come, saith Yahweh, that I will send a famine in the land, not a famine of bread or a thirst for water, but of hearing the words of Yahweh. And they shall wander from sea to sea, and from the north even to the east. They shall run to and fro to seek the word of Yahweh, and shall not find it. Right? And that's going into how there's going to be a time where, how do you hear the words of Yahweh? Through his men. There's going to be a time where we're no longer going to be speaking these words publicly, because it's going to be dangerous. Okay, and I had a dream, which I believe was a vision, maybe like a year, 2 years ago, going into how, you could tell things that had already gone down. And I remember seeing, it was the brother GMS South Carolina, that's what his YouTube handle is, and he was sitting down at a bench. And I remember I went to just sit down with him, and we were just seeing, which I believe were Israelites, just marching down the street, IUIC style. And you could tell that, they didn't have no wisdom, because at that point, it's no longer wise. They were just doing it for, the views and to be seen. But the message was like, the right people are going to realize, it's time to cut it. But these other groups are not going to realize that. And this is going to lead to their own demise. But it says, one more time, and they shall wander from sea to sea, and from the north even to the east. They shall run to and fro to seek the word of Yahweh, and shall not find it. In that day shall the fair virgins and young men faint for thirst. Right? Because they're going to be looking for the answers, but they're not going to get them. Right? Because, hey, like I said, the same recurring theme, when they had the opportunity, they disregarded it. So that's why it says, I think it's Isaiah 55 and 6, Seek ye the Lord while he may be found. Call ye upon him, while he is near. Right? Get this while you can. Build the understanding while you can. Because when everything collapses, this is going to be the only thing you got. That's why it says, Isaiah 33:6, wisdom and knowledge shall be the stability of thy times, and that the fear of Yahweh is his treasure. So there's wisdom, the knowledge of the prophecies, right? Understanding why everything is happening is what's going to keep you stable. Because the people that don't know this are just going to think that this is, their worst nightmare. Their mentality is going to be, it's only getting worse. It's only getting worse and worse and worse. I can't believe it's only getting worse. And it's only going to get worse so much. It's going to get worse to the extent that nobody's ever seen before. That's why many people are going to crash out. They're going to take their own lives. Okay, they're going to trust in the shadow of Egypt. Let's go there. Because they don't trust in Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai. I believe it's Isaiah 30. Right? Isaiah 30 and verse 1. It says, woe to the rebellious children, saith Yahweh, that take counsel but not of me, and that cover with the covering but not of my spirit, that they may add sin to sin, that walk to go down into Egypt, and have not asked at my mouth, to strengthen themselves in the strength of Pharaoh, and to trust in the shadow of Egypt. Right? And that's you wicked Israelites. Right? Go into Egypt, aka Babylon the Great, aka America, trusting in the system instead of trusting in the Lord. Here it is, you ain't got no money, but you haven't asked the Lord for money. Right? You gotta pray to Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai for what you need, no matter what it is. Okay, because the Lord is the one that gives the increase. Right? It says that the Lord, in a sudden can make a poor man rich. So everything comes from Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai. It doesn't matter how much work you do, right? It all comes from Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai. So it says, therefore shall the strength of Pharaoh, it says, that walk to go down to Egypt that have not asked at my mouth, to strengthen themselves in the strength of Pharaoh, and to trust in the shadow of Egypt. Therefore shall the strength of Pharaoh be your shame, and the trust in the shadow of Egypt your confusion. Right? Because trusting in the system is only going to lead to your demise. Right? You're going to be ashamed because here it is, you thought this system was going to save you. It was going to lead to a better life. But it's only going to get worse and worse. Right? But the people that take the chip, they're going to think that, oh, everything's going to be fine now, but it's only going to get worse. Okay, the economy is not going to bounce back. There's still going to be a lack of food. Okay, that's going to be the next thing, is the famines, which I was listening to a couple of videos today in the morning, going into how, the whole thing with the Strait of Hormuz being shut down, okay, that the fertilizer, the urea for the animals' food is primarily, it comes through that strait, and how that's not being, brought over here. So there's going to be a shortage of fertilizer, and, it's perfectly in time for planting season. So they're going into how, these farmers are not going to be able to do, their full planting because they don't got the supplies, or it's going to get too expensive to even operate the farming business, which all ties into how, I saw another post going into how these farmers' land is being bought out to establish data centers, right? And here it is, maybe it was like 4 or 5 years ago, 3 years ago, you had Bill Gates buy a bunch of farmland in all of America, and it's all to establish data centers and ultimately the NWO. They're all their 15-minute smart cities, and to engineer a famine. Okay? It's all going to happen one way or the other. Those famines will come. So let's read Isaiah 19, because this also ties into, America being called Egypt. So Isaiah 19 and verse 1, it says, the burden of Egypt, behold, the Lord rideth upon a swift cloud, and shall come into Egypt, and the idols of Egypt shall be moved at his presence, and the heart of Egypt shall melt in the midst of it. Right? And that's going into a Yahweh Shai's return. Right? It says in Acts the 1st chapter that the Lord left in a cloud, and that he was going to come back the same way he left, which is in a cloud. So those clouds are symbolic for vehicles, right? So-called UFOs, which are the vehicles of the angels, according to Ezekiel the 1st chapter, when it talks about the wheel inside the wheel. And it says, and I will set the Egyptians against the Egyptians, and they shall fight everyone against his brother and everyone against his neighbor, city against city, and kingdom against kingdom. Right? So American against American. Right? Civil war is what's going to come. Right? It talks about that in Second Ezra, it's either 15 or 16. It talks about how, you know, there shall be sedition among men, uproars of the people, and that every man shall do, you know, what's in the power of his own hand. They shall not regard their kings nor princes. They're going to do whatever they want to do, because soon all that, you know, government is going to fly out the window. There's going to be a free-for-all, a survival of the fittest. And that's where you're going to get your people kicking down your door. Right? It says that, you know, I can't quote it off the top, but it says pretty much a neighbor shall have no, you know, you're not going to have pity upon your neighbor. Right? He's going to take what you got because of the lack of bread and for great tribulation. So, you know, that famine, the lack of bread is going to drive people to do those, you know, cannibalism, to do all types of, you know, immoral things. Which, if you're hit with the situation of cannibalism, you just gotta die, man. You, like, even if it's, you know, there's famine around you and there's a piece of pork, you can't eat the piece of pork. No, this is how serious it is. If there's famine around you, you haven't eaten in days, and there's a piece of pork in front of you, you can't eat the piece of pork. Okay? So, it says, and the spirit of Egypt shall fail in the midst thereof, and I will destroy the counsel thereof, and they shall seek to the idols, and to the charmers, and to them that have familiar spirits, and to the wizards. Right? So the spirit of America is going to fail. Right? The Americanism, patriotism, that, you know, spirit of the American dream and everything's okay, all that is going to fail. People are not going to trust in this kingdom no more. And once they stop trusting in this kingdom and the material, they're going to look to the spiritual. But it's not going to be the right way. They're going to go to the, as it says, idols, charmers, familiar spirits, and wizards, the left-hand side. Not knowing that the left-hand side is also going to get you cooked. So, you know, these people are going to be completely lost in the sauce, confused, because they didn't trust in Yahweh Bashem Yahushua. So, it says, and the Egyptians will I give over into the hand of a cruel lord, and a fierce king shall rule over them, saith the Lord Yahweh of hosts. Which we believe through the Spirit for that to be DJ Trump. You know, the way he's operating, he seems to be fulfilling this prophecy of the fierce king and the cruel lord. Because of all the presidents, he's the one that's really applying that hammer. You know, that's really going in and just doing what he wants to do. But let's go to Isaiah 47. Isaiah 47, and I'll close it with this chapter. I'll start at verse 3. It says, I'll start at verse 1. It says, Yahweh's judgment upon Babylon. It says, come down and sit in the dust, O virgin daughter of Babylon. Sit on the ground. There is no throne, O daughter of the Chaldeans, for thou shalt no more be called tender and delicate. Take the millstones and grind meal, uncover thy locks, make bare the leg, and uncover thy thigh, pass over the rivers. Thy nakedness shall be uncovered, yea, thy shame shall be seen. I will take vengeance, and I will not meet thee as a man. And that's going into how this kingdom is going to be brought down. This place is going to be humbled. You know, that's why it says in Jeremiah, I think it's 50 or 51, it says how, you know, it says the hammer of the whole earth has been broken asunder, right? This place is going to go and be brought down. And the whole concept of taking the millstones and grinding meal, right? This is something that somebody in a low condition, you know, would do. That's like a low tier job according to, you know, that society. So all the concept of this place being brought down. It says, thy nakedness shall be uncovered, yea, thy shame shall be seen. And we can see that happening, you know, real time right now with how these nations are realizing that, you know, the way that this kingdom operates is not correct. Right, and goes into, you know, what happened during those 350 years of slavery. Right, it talks about how, I think it's a Habakkuk, says that shameful spewing shall be upon thy glory. Okay? So it says, thy nakedness shall be uncovered, yea, thy shame shall be seen. I will take vengeance, and I will not meet thee as a man. Going into Yahweh Shai's return. Right? He's coming back in that celestial body. It says, as for our Redeemer, the Yahweh of hosts is his name, the Holy One of Israel. Sit thou silent and get thee into darkness, O daughter of the Chaldeans, for thou shalt no more be called the Lady of Kingdoms. It says, I was wroth with my people, I have polluted mine inheritance, and given them into thine hand. Thou didst show them no mercy, upon the ancient hast thou very heavily laid thy yoke. Right, so they didn't show us mercy in slavery. It went above and beyond. It says, and thou saidest, I shall be a lady forever, so that thou didst not lay these things to thy heart, neither didst remember the latter end of it. Therefore hear now this, thou that art given to pleasures, that dwellest carelessly, that sayest in thine heart, I am, and none else beside me. I shall not sit as a widow, neither shall I know the loss of children. And that's the mentality of this kingdom, of the people here, is that they're never going to see pain, they're never going to see destruction, hard times. They think that everything is going to be always okay, that they're going to always have access to the McDonald's and the cheap food and entertainment. You know, eventually the bread and circus is going to come to an end. That's what they're not expecting though. It says, but these two things shall come to thee in a moment, in one day. The loss of children and widowhood, they shall come upon thee in their perfection, for the multitude of thy sorceries, and for the great abundance of thine enchantments. Right, for the wickedness that Babylon has done, this place will be destroyed. And in one day, in Revelation 18 specifically, it says, in 1 hour, okay, this place will be destroyed by those nuclear missiles. It says, for thou hast trusted in thy wickedness, thou hast said, none seeth me. Thy wisdom and thy knowledge, it hath perverted thee, and thou hast said in thine heart, I am, and none else beside me. Therefore shall evil come upon thee, thou shalt not know from whence it riseth, and mischief shall fall upon thee, thou shalt not be able to put it off, and desolation shall come upon thee suddenly, which thou shalt not know. Going into how, hey, this place is going to go down in multiple ways. It's not just going to be one thing. No, it's going to be multiple things that bring the collapse of this kingdom. It says, stand now with thine enchantments, and with the multitude of thy sorceries, wherein thou hast labored from thy youth, if so be thou shalt be able to profit, if so be thou mayest prevail. It says, thou art wearied in the multitude of thy counsels. Let now the astrologers, the stargazers, the monthly prognosticators stand up and save thee from these things that shall come upon thee. All right, so let's see if that witchcraft can save you from this destruction. You know, because this place is all ran on witchcraft. The people at the top, they all are associated with Satan, you know, with the left-hand side. And you can see that, you know, by the Epstein files. Everything that's coming out about, you know, what they do. As it says, you know, they were going to be exposed. Esau, Edom was going to be revealed. It says, behold, they shall be a stubble, the fire shall burn them, they shall not deliver themselves from the power of the flame, there shall not be a coal to warm at, nor fire to sit before it. Thus saith Yahweh, or it says, thus shall they be unto thee with whom thou hast labored, even thy merchants from thy youth, they shall wander everyone to his quarter, none shall save thee. Right, so none of that left-hand witchcraft is going to be able to save them from those nuclear missiles. Right, it's going to be complete destruction. No one is going to save this kingdom. So with that, I'll give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, by Hashem, Yahushua, by Hashem, Kakadash, and double honors to the elder bishops and apostles of Great Millstone that taught me this truth. I want to give shalom to like shalom.